Hello class of 2022. I wanted to start off by saying congratulations on your graduation and to also say thank you. So being a teacher at Ideas San Benito for 3 years was an incredibly challenging experience, but it was also an incredibly fulfilling experience as well. I got to teach you guys for 2 years, so you all helped me fulfill dreams that I didn't know that I had. I also wanted to start off by saying an apology. So I had originally intended to write you guys a letter. You can see the draft of this long letter here, and to provide you with a general letter and then write something personal at the end and provide it to you at graduation. And I think this letter was just overly complicated, too academic, too boring, and then didn't really get to convey the essence of what I wanted to say to you. And so I decided to scrap it and just provide you with a poorly edited YouTube video instead. So I wanted to apologize for the poor editing of this YouTube video. There's probably going to be a lot of ums, a lot of stuttering that might contribute to the length of this YouTube video as well. So my apologies in advance for that. But I do have a rough agenda. It's not scripted, so there will be a lot of ums, a lot of stuttering, and I wanted to talk about your paper to annoy you, a little bit about the 14th Amendment, and I'll explain why, and then some things that I ask that you do in the future. So your paper. So completing a final research paper was not a requirement of AP Government or AP Microeconomics, but I did grade you guys on the progress you made in actually researching your research paper, summarizing the sources that you had, and the outline that some of you completed. I do think that writing a research paper is an incredibly valuable skill that needs practice, because you will see when you are in college that writing a paper is kind of a core skill that you need. So I wanted to provide you with an opportunity to practice this skill before you go to college and to receive feedback from myself. And so you can still complete the research paper itself and submit it before June 10th at my email address, which I'll put in the description of this YouTube video, rtdiaz700@gmail.com. I will provide you feedback on that research paper. You'll get to select the form of feedback you would like to receive, whichever you feel more comfortable with. It can either be written feedback, it can also be feedback that is delivered to you via a Zoom call, or feedback delivered to you via a phone call. So yes, if you want, please submit those research papers. I know several of you have already done that, and I plan on providing you with feedback. All I ask is that you submit it before June 10th. I have a very busy July, but I will be able to start scheduling meetings once I get a good picture of the amount of students that want that feedback. Next, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which kind of gets at the essence of what I was trying to do in this way too overlong and complicated paper. I was planning on taking a concept from each class that I instructed you in, because I instructed you in 3 classes. You guys were a big part of my professional career as a teacher, taking a concept from AP World History, AP Government, AP Microeconomics, explaining it and relating it back to your life. Sounded really cool, sounded really creative, sounded beautiful in my head, and then the execution was just poor, and I'm just going to go ahead and burn this letter. However, I wanted to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about the 14th Amendment, and then I'll explain why, and then ask that you continue to do something, or do something for me at the end of the YouTube video. So this kind of relates to the magic of being a teacher, especially being a teacher in a course or courses that you love, is that you get to anticipate students' reactions to certain things, to content that you're going to roll out. So for me, it was, there were so many different things, right? I've taught 5 classes at Ideas San Benito. I've liked all the classes that I've taught, and they were so many different, points where I was anticipating reactions that you guys would have, or stuff that you would say in response to something that I presented. Maybe a controversial video, or a historical event, or whatever, what have you. And one of the things that I was, eager to roll out to you, that I thought would just be so heartening as a teacher to see your responses and reactions, was the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And I will say that it is hard to not kind of smile so much. I deliberately tried to do that, especially in the courses that I taught, because they had, a lot of, obviously, political, connections, and I feel like it is the responsibility of a teacher to sort of maintain an aura, or to maintain, neutrality, so to speak. But I want to just kind of underscore to you that I definitely did feel, so proud of your reactions to so many of the things in classes, sort of the arguments that you guys made and built, specifically with respect to the 14th Amendment. And so if you remember how I originally rolled it out, I just had you guys come in. It was a simple do now, just read the 14th Amendment, and then this open-ended question, explain why it's so magical, and in parentheses, why is it Mr. Diaz's favorite amendment? 2 to 3 sentences, and then I started playing these nerdy classical music that kind of underscored how magical the text of the amendment was. And several of you pointed out, beautiful, specific, expertly specific clauses of the Constitution. Several of you pointed out, it's the first time that there's restrictions on state governments in contrast to the Bill of Rights, or there's this word equality in the Constitution. I'm not sure what equal protection means, but equality seems important. It says that state governments can't have due process. Several of you pointed out it came after the Civil War, and it was just magical. It was like a symphony to my ears to hear you guys articulating sort of the core provisions of the 14th Amendment, recognizing them, devoid of its context, because I didn't provide you context yet, but sort of getting at every core part of that amendment. And I think it's also very metaphorical that probably the most important part of the Constitution, or one of the most important parts of the Constitution, is a amendment, right? It's something that was added on, not in the original Constitution, but has done something, has been so important to fundamentally restructuring American government. So just a little refresher on what the 14th Amendment does, and some context behind the 14th Amendment is that the 14th Amendment is one of 3 Reconstruction Amendments that take place after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery, and the 15th Amendment, which says that you can't deny a person the right to vote on account of race. The 14th Amendment is sandwiched between them and has a lot of important principles that need clarification by the courts and society later. Now, the context is important, right? America had just fought a civil war that 600,000 plus Americans had died in. Thousands of Americans, were fighting to preserve the wicked institution of slavery. Abraham Lincoln, probably one of the greatest presidents of the United States, or definitely one of the best presidents in the United States, had just been assassinated, and these Reconstruction era amendments are ratified, and they become sort of important tools of law. And the 14th Amendment has several, key clauses. It says that it provides for naturalized or natural-born citizenship. So it says that as long as you're a citizen of the United States, or as long as you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States, which is a radical departure from racialized notions of citizenship. It says that state governments can't deny citizens or people due process, or they cannot deny people the equal protection of the laws. Right, so very important clauses of the 14th Amendment. However, kind of a warning articulated by Meryl Streep at a commencement address at Barnard College that I'll include in the link in the description, was this fabulous quote that there's change and resistance to change and then more change. And so the 14th Amendment has a lot, the Reconstruction Amendments have a lot of promise. They seem to be guarantees of a more equitable interracial democracy, and then inevitably, or maybe not inevitably, but unfortunately, that there is backlash. Most powerfully articulated by the Supreme Court of the United States. Right, so the Supreme Court early on, some instances, I'm not going to go through all of them, says actually there's no special privileges and immunities of citizenship, of national citizenship. There's none. So they put a wrench in that as a tool to potentially, or throw a wrench at that tool to potentially expand rights and liberties to formerly enslaved people. Or, in their, as southern states began creating these openly authoritarian apartheid systems in the South, trying to install grandfather clauses and poll taxes and literacy tests, these cynical attempts to deny African American men the right to vote, the Supreme Court stands aside. Lets these apparently flagrant violations, evidently flagrant violations of the 15th Amendment stand. As long as they're not specifically using race as a criterion, it's okay. And then, infamously, in 1896, when the court is presented with this question on whether racial segregation was constitutional or violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, the court infamously rules that it in fact does not. As long as facilities are separate but equal, they're okay. So green lights, decades of racial segregation legal racial segregation in the South. And so change, resistance to change, backlash, and more change. And so that long night is finally ended thanks to legal advocacy. The Warren Court in 1954 eventually reverses the precedent set in Plessy versus Ferguson. They say that racial segregation is inherently unequal, can lead to psychological damage in the Brown versus Board of Education decision. This Supreme Court decision energizes a growing civil rights movement of the day. One of the leaders being Dr. Martin Luther King, whose letter from the Birmingham Jail we read. And that civil rights movement eventually culminates in the passage of key pieces of legislation like the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Very, very core pieces of legislation. Now, I wish I could just, bookend that and say everyone lived happily ever after, but I think we can all recognize sort of tensions that exist within our society today, that we can see paralleled in history. And also, we've seen the court, again, restrict the power and scope of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, and then recently in Bronovich versus DNC. And inviting the question on whether that this is a sort of backlash to more welcoming change. Change, or is it change, more change? So from the 14th Amendment, right, we did a gallery walk where we saw how the 14th Amendment and sort of related it all the way back to current civil rights movement. But the 14th Amendment itself has been used as a tool to expand rights and liberties to many different historically marginalized groups, has been used as a tool to legalize same-sex marriage, outlaw certain forms of sex discrimination, expand access to abortion, stuff like that. Obviously, that other piece is in the news today, right? So change, resistance to change, and then more change. And I'm not making a comment or a political statement on that, but I think that's just something that you need to be aware of. And that's what makes law, I think, so magical, is that these sort of shaky nature of our common law system can be upset depending on the courts or the nature of our democracy in general is one where there's a lot of tension and different political opinions, and there can be a lot of impeders of change, and there can be people that we feel that are trying to create change that we just don't want, right? It's just a lot, right? It's a lot to process, and it's very easy to get frustrated and feel disaffected and want to give up and throw our hands up in the air and just say to heck with it. Which kind of gets at what I'm going to ask that you continue to do, is to be civically engaged. Try to keep up with the news, try to engage with government and politics in the best way that you can, and try to address injustice wherever it is you see it and whenever possible. I think that's incredibly critical. I'm not prescribing you a certain way to do that. That's not my job, but I'm just saying that I think you have a moral responsibility and duty to pursue that in whatever it is that you do. And one of the parts that I love teaching in AP Government too, I guess I'll stick with Government, the class that everybody loves. You all hated my first class, AP World History and AP Microeconomics, but whatever, is teaching Letter from a Birmingham Jail, written by Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think it's a very powerful letter because it articulates a very sophisticated political philosophy and view of law, that I think, and moral philosophy as well. And so I really, wanted to emphasize to you one aspect of that. I had on the top of my room, on my board, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws from the start of the year to the end of the year, for several different reasons. For the first reason, I think it sort of shows the importance of being a little bit of a troublemaker sometimes. And I think it was in stark contrast to an educational institution that is very highly regimented, very highly structured, which I think allows for good education, but it often implicitly tells students to be passive, to just accept the status quo. And I think I wanted that quote on the board because I wanted you to realize that when you graduated, that life looks a little bit different from the sort of educational environment that I feel like we may have impressed too heavily upon you. And I think that you have a moral responsibility to address injustices and to speak up and to act and not be a bystander. And I think King, expertly, distinguishes between just laws and unjust laws. He say just laws uplift human personality, unjust laws degrade human personality. And he says we have a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So, we can extrapolate that further and say we have a moral responsibility to act when we see injustice. And I think that's true. And I think it's intuitively powerful. I think it's an idea that is articulated in a lot of philosophies and a lot of religions. And I would ask that you continue to address injustice and speak up about a variety of different things that you feel passionately about, and be the positive change that you want to be in the world. I think it also kind of gets at that there is moral burdens to doing nothing. And I wanted to leave you with a quote by Samantha Power, who is a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, or former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She's a current administrator of USAID, and a former Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, where she says, "We decide on issues large and small whether we'll be bystanders or upstanders." And I think doing nothing comes with its unique moral burdens. Paradoxically, doing nothing is doing something, right? I feel like it's almost as worse. I think Samantha Power does a really good job in an article that I'll include in the description of this video called Bystanders to Genocide, about the Rwandan genocide, one of the last topics that we covered in AP World History, by the way. So that's why it's in the video, or it's in the description of this video. But she does a really good job at illustrating this idea that doing nothing carries with it its own unique set of moral burdens. And it's almost like we are helping perpetuate injustice by doing nothing as well. So I want to encourage you to be civically engaged, be the change that you want to be for other people, continue to do that for me, or try to do that in college, try to do that in your professional life. I will always be available to you. You can call upon me for anything that you need. And it has been an absolute pleasure being your teacher. And I love you all. So have a good life.